Good evening. Thank you for coming to the session. We're about to get started. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the maximum exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that audience members may not share the same views as the speakers, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event will respect the right of the speakers to share their perspectives and ideas and not cause a disruption to the event's activities. At the end of the event, there will be a question and answer session during which you may ask questions. Please be sure to phrase your comments in the form of a question. And in the interest of time, we ask that each person be concise and ask only one question. Thank you.
Okay, let's start. I want we'll have these guys walk in as soon as they jump on stage. I'll go. They're not good. Yeah. It's Jimmy Eat World that have a song in the middle.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Raghav Akula, and I'm a sophomore in the Walsh School of Foreign Service, majoring in science, technology, and international affairs. I'm also part of the Georgetown Journal of International Affairs, where I serve as a solicitor to solicit academic article topics from professionals, practitioners, and scholars around the world, and then serve as an editor to shepherd them through a process towards professional publication. I'm really excited to introduce our guest this evening. Marie Harf is a former Geopolitics Fall 2017 Fellow, on-air commentator for Fox News, and senior advisor for former Secretary of State John Kerry. Morgan Ortagus is the founder of Polaris National Security, a think tank on American foreign policy, and former State Department spokesperson during the Trump administration. Moderating this conversation is Professor Tony Arend, Georgetown's Professor of Government and Foreign Service and Chair of the Department of Government. Don't forget to join the conversation on social media by tagging at GUPolitics. And now, please join us in welcoming Marie Harf, Morgan Ortagus, and Professor Arend.
Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to see so many people here on a Thursday evening. So this is great. Thursdays, sometimes at Georgetown, people are known to go out into the community for libations. Now, that may still happen afterwards, but they're here now, so that's very important. Well, it's an honor to have my two colleagues here with us this evening to talk about the foreign policy challenges which we face in either another Trump administration or a Harris administration. And the fact that I've even said that is unusual. This is the first election where we have seen a former president running against a sitting vice president. And so what that means is we actually have two foreign policy records. We have the record of the Trump administration, and we have the record of the Biden-Harris administration. So the first question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to ask this to both of our panelists, is how would you characterize the main achievements of the Trump administration and the Biden-Harris administration? So we'll start with Morgan. How would you characterize the main achievements, the accomplishments of the Trump administration?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to see all of you here as students, especially the ones with t-shirts on. That means you're really into politics. So I appreciate it. It feels like it was just yesterday that I was in university studying political science. I always tell everyone, so I was a sophomore in college when 9/11 happened. And then we started debate and discussing and arguing the Iraq War in college. And I remember thinking at the time, this doesn't really make sense. There's Sunnis, there's Shias, there's Kurds. And then I thought, well, these people in Washington are much smarter than I am. They must know what's going on. Fast forward a few years later, 2007, I'm in Baghdad and I'm like, oh, they weren't smarter than me. No one knew what was going on. So I say that to say, I'm glad all of you are here. You will blink and you'll be sitting in this chair where I am giving a lecture. So just work really hard. And I always say this too, I do have to run out a couple minutes early, but for any students, I say this to every university I go to. If there's anything that I can do, I'm saying this early, find me on Twitter or you guys can have my cell, but if there's anything I can do, if you're interested in either a career in diplomacy or in the military, I'm in the military, I'm in the Navy Reserves. I just made 04, yay. Just got the 04 board. So if you're interested in the military or diplomacy or in the intelligence community, I would love to help you, even if you're a liberal. That was a joke. All right, good. All right, we got it going. Okay, so main achievements of the Trump administration. I would say probably if you break it in two sections, I was not in the first 2 years. I was on Wall Street at the time. But if you look at the first 2 years, I think that they would probably say their main goals were two things. One was destroying the physical caliphate of ISIS. So remember that President Trump inherited in January of 17 a physical caliphate of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. This is something that she worked on as well, obviously. And the Obama administration that last year had really worked to start to go after ISIS, especially, you know, we saw the beheadings and the kidnappings and that sort of things. But it was really a priority of the Trump administration to destroy that physical caliphate. Now, you know that you're never going to destroy an ideology completely. And unfortunately, we have seen a resurgence of ISIS again in Iraq and Syria. But taking out Baghdadi, destroying that physical caliphate was incredibly important. I would also say there was clearly a major focus on the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. So every presidential administration, when they come in, the White House at the national security writes a national security strategy. The Defense Department writes the NDS, the National Defense Strategy. And what was really interesting about some of my friends who authored that national security strategy in 2017 is it was the first time since 9/11 where you saw a national security strategy that really shifted from GWAT, global war on terrorism, counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, being the priority for the White House. It shifted in that administration to great power competition between the United States, China, Russia. That was actually something that was largely continued in the Biden-Harris national security strategy that they released, I believe, in year 2 of their administration as well. I would say that was you know, having the U.S. government pivot towards more of a focus on the rising threat of China and Russia and destroying ISIS were probably the focus of the first 2 years. And then, of course, the second 2 years in which I came in and served, we were very focused on the maximum economic pressure campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran. You guys probably know all that, so I don't have to go into detail. I would say there's a lot of things that were going on almost every day at the State Department, and Maria and I held similar jobs. I traveled with the Secretary of State over 50 countries, every single trip around the world that he did, I was on. I even traveled until I was 32 weeks pregnant. My last trip was Khartoum. When I texted my OBGYN here in DC and said, I'm in Khartoum, but don't worry, it's a day trip. And she just sent me an eye roll emoji back. And then I got kicked off the plane after that trip because no one wanted me to give birth on the Secretary of State's plane. But it was, you know, it was amazing. But every day that I was with him, there was some focus on Iran or some focus on China. And I would also say this is going to be a little counterintuitive. The final thing that I would say was, I think, an achievement we could go through. Abraham Accords, the first peace deals between Israel and Arab states in 26 years. I was a part of that. That was incredibly moving for me. I also think we had a lot of successes on trade. Now, I know you're going to be like, trade, did she really say that? Yes, I did, actually. Obviously, we had USMCA that was able, that negotiation, which is incredibly important between US, Mexico, Canada. We also were able to reauthorize the bilateral trade agreement between the United States and Japan. And that was, also a very significant achievement. We actually haven't seen any trade deals at all from the Biden-Harris administration. So a little bit of the media narrative is like Trump's really bad on tariffs and trades. We actually got trade deals done, and we haven't seen any before the Senate in the past 4 years. So I would put that as a W in our column.
Excellent. Thank you, Morgan, very much. A lot of stuff there, a lot of stuff to raise and questions. Yes.
Working. Can you guys
Yeah,
hear me?
I can hear
Okay,
you.
Good.
So accomplishments of the Biden-Harris administration.
How much time do I have, Tony? First, it's great to be back at Georgetown. I was a GU Politics Fellow first, but then worked at the School of Foreign Service. And Morgan and I mean, this is a good lesson for everyone. We are from different parties. We have known each other a very long time and have sort of come up in the same media, foreign policy, intel world. And, it's nice to have someone who you respect on the other side, who's smart, who's also a woman, who you can kind of say, like, is this right? Is this weird? Like, should I take this job? Should I not? So I want to say that at the outset. When the Biden-Harris administration came in, I think there are a couple things that proactively they wanted to do and have done. The first is rebuild our alliances and relationships around the world. I don't think it's a secret that President Trump, I think some of his cabinet was a little different, but that President Trump had very strong, quite negative feelings about NATO, about many of our alliances around the world. He still gives voice to those, and had really destroyed a lot of those relationships by his unilateral sort of go it alone, reckless behavior that a lot of them felt that way, whether it was meeting with Kim Jong-un without preconditions, whether it was his closeness with Putin. So number one was to rebuild those alliances. And we saw those have immediate real world impact when Russia invaded Ukraine. When President Biden and Kamala Harris and Tony Blinken went around the world and got not just countries in Eastern Europe who were scared about Russian aggression, not just European countries that were a part of NATO, but countries in the Asia Pacific, countries in South America, to stand with us as we created a coalition that has helped Ukraine in its fight against Russia, defending democratic values and preserving the liberal world order today. So that was a goal that I think, even though the Russia-Ukraine conflict is still quite hot, Zelensky's in town today, Russia has made some gains. Russia thought they were going to win in 48 hours. And because the Biden team had invested in those relationships around the world, they were able to capitalize on that. One thing you learn in government is sometimes you come in with a real proactive agenda and then life happens. October 7th happened. We're almost at a year anniversary of October 7th. So I don't think that the Biden team had on their dance card, we really want to have to deal with Middle East peace. But they've had to. And we can talk a little bit today about how that might be an electoral issue. There's lots of thoughts and feelings and views on that. There's some polling on that too. But I think not just using international relationships on something like security when it comes to Ukraine, but rebuilding things like our work in the climate space. This is the UN General Assembly is happening this week. I was just up in New York. It's also Climate Week. Reinvesting in international efforts to confront climate change, which is only getting worse. It's almost October and it's sweltering outside, right? So that's all you need to know. Reinvesting in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic in internationally how we prevent the next pandemic and how we help countries that have fewer resources get vaccines, not just on things like COVID, but Mpox, right? These are things that don't get headlines all the time, but they really matter when it comes to American soft power around the world. And it matters if countries are afraid of us. I am not a pacifist. I worked at the CIA. I am not. I'm a Democrat who worked at the CIA. Countries need to be scared of you, but they also need to respect you. And they need to see that unlike China, who is trying to buy friends around the world, that we are investing in relationships all over the world, even when it's not in the headlines, even when it's not sexy and fun. And I think the Biden team, I would put that at the top of the list. They've re-engaged in diplomacy to try and prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. They've reinvigorated many of our relationships in Asia. They have expanded bilateral strategic deals around the world in a number of ways. So I think when you look at what Kamala Harris says about what they've done and what she wants to do, It's America being a leader in the world, not because of the strength of our military, although that matters, but because of the strength of our values and because we are partners with countries. We don't try and beat them all into submission, even if we could, we can't. So I think that's what they would say are their main successes.
So let's pivot, and I'm going to start with Marie first and then go to Morgan. So the pivot is this. How is a Harris administration going to be different from a Biden-Harris administration? Obviously, there are some things that have come up recently that she would be confronted with that Biden hasn't been. But how is her administration? Is her administration going to be just a continuation of Biden 0.2, or is it going to be something different?
I think it's going to be Biden plus. So what do I mean by that? You know, for example, I think Kamala Harris very much supports Ukraine, not just countries like Ukraine, countries like Belarus, other countries in Eastern Europe who need America to stand with them in their fight for democracy. I absolutely think she will continue that whoever her Secretary of Defense is, and I hope it's the first female Secretary of Defense when she wins, that they will absolutely continue standing by Ukraine and countering Russia in all sorts of ways. The root of your question feels like it's the Middle East, a little bit, if I have to guess. You know, she is very, first of all, they're different generations. And just let's talk about the Middle East for 1 minute. I mean, Joe Biden is an incredibly strong supporter of Israel. He got up right after the October 7th attack and talked about how he had met Golda Meir on his first visit. Like, that is his generation. She's a different generation, right? I was heartened by her remarks at the Democratic National Convention where I was about how strongly they were supportive of Israel having the right to defend itself by itself, but also giving voice to the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. I spent some time this summer in Israel and the Palestinian territories, and am personally a deeply committed Zionist, but also believe that you cannot ignore and continue to oppress the Palestinian people in the way you are, either strategically or morally. So I think that she's very much like a values and principles-based leader. So I think I think she's also a quite centrist Democrat. And so that means investing in alliances, including military alliances, but centering values in a way that I think is really important. And that means investing in places sometimes that may not have real strategic value, but it matters when America shows up. And I think that's where I think she will take it.
Okay, thank you.
And a lot of her staff, foreign policy staff, is like Biden, Obama people. She doesn't have, you know, she's not like Bernie Sanders, who has a completely different view of the world, a different foreign policy apparatus, different foreign policy staff, comes out of a very different tradition. She comes out of a very mainstream democratic tradition. And I will say the last thing I'll say, she's focused a lot on the border, and countries, especially the Northern Triangle, really invested a lot of time and effort to try and stem some of the flows. Numbers have now dropped to the lowest point since the Trump administration. But I think that's one place where I do think that she has said she supports quite tough legislative action and is very much a centrist Democrat.
Okay, thanks, Marie. So let's now think about Trump 2. So Morgan mentioned the accomplishments of the Trump administration. What would a new Trump administration look like? Is it going to be a continuation? Obviously, there's a lot of things, as I said, that have happened since then.
Yeah.
But what would you see a second term for Donald Trump's administration looking like in foreign policy?
Well, first I want to piggyback just really quickly on one thing Marie said. I would not have accepted the job as State Department spokesperson if I didn't corner her at Fox and say, should I was leaning towards no. And I cornered her at Fox and said, should I take this job? And she told me yes. And I say that to say, you can't get anything done in Washington if you only hang out with everybody who agrees with you. And it's also not a good way to challenge your own thinking and to think about policy. So it's important, I think, to have those relationships. And further, Marie Marie served in the intelligence community under President Bush. I was in the intelligence community under President Obama. So it's possible, I know it doesn't seem like it this day and age, but it's possible just to be a patriot. Obviously in the reserves in which I serve, if Kamala Harris is elected and if she calls me overseas, I'll go. I would obviously argue to all of you today that I think that the policies that we pursue would actually lead to a more peaceful world and would stop all the hot wars that we see around the world. So I'll get right into that. so a few things, I think what's really important, first of all, no one knows what a Trump 2 term would look like except him. So just to say that clearly off the bat. So no, I got the question Tuesday night at a dinner, an ambassador said to me, so could you get President Trump to stop saying, and I went, stop right there. I was like, if I could control that and had that power, I would have used it a long time ago. So when you think about a second Trump term, one of the things that I think is really important that the Trump team and whoever he puts around him would have to do, you can't treat it like it will be a second term, but you can't treat it as a second term. What do I mean by that? You can't pretend the last 4 years didn't happen. And I actually thought in many ways, and some things that the Biden team did was actually continuation of Trump policy, especially on China. The tariffs were still there, sanctions. The Asia team there's been a ton of cohesion between those of us who worked on China and Asia policy. We took the Quad, which had kind of like died. We brought it up to the foreign minister, secretary of state level. President Biden took it up to the leader level. So that was great, right? So there was actually somewhat of a lot of continuity on that portfolio. The place, the Middle East is where we will have the most divergence as it relates to a portfolio, and especially Iran. And one of the things that I've told a lot of people who worked on Iran is I think the Biden team came in and sort of looked at the last Trump, the 4 years of Trump, especially because we withdrew from the JCPOA, a signature achievement that Marie worked on. Sure, she was not happy with us on that. But they sort of said, well, that was weird, right? The last 4 years. And kind of, I felt that they treated it as the Obama administration had just ended. We're going to forget what Trump did the last 4 years and we're going right back in. And what I mean by that is they wouldn't even, and I love Ned Price, but Ned wasn't allowed to say the word Abraham Accords, the term Abraham Accords. You could tell they weren't letting him say it from the podium, and he got grilled from our favorite reporter on this. I've always felt like that was kind of a silly policy, like peace is peace, like let's build, let's expand upon it. I do think as we've gotten into the final year especially since October 7th, I do think that you've seen the Biden team start to take a tougher stance towards Iran, embrace the Abraham Accords, actually try to get Saudi into the Abraham Accords. So these are all really positive things that I just wish that they had focused on year one. So I think it's important if there is a second Trump term, you can't pretend that the last 4 years didn't happen. Our U.S. Navy in the CENTCOM theater in the Red Sea, our ships are seeing more action than we've seen since World War II. So that means nobody in the U.S. Navy who's on a ship or a submarine has seen the type of combat that we're seeing. Obviously, it's from the Houthis with ballistic missiles and drones. Nobody has seen that in their lifetime, right? The Navy spent the last 20 years with the Army playing soldier and playing sand sailor and not doing what we're doing now on ships and submarines. So that has changed. Obviously, if they get to a ceasefire, great. I think that we're still going to have all of the residual effects to have to deal with, especially the Islamic Republic of Iran and in the Middle East. And then, of course, there's going to be Russia, Ukraine. It's been reported. I was looking at Twitter or X, whatever we call it now, on the way here tonight. It looks, I know Zelensky met with President Biden earlier this week. I'm sure he met with the vice president. I didn't see. I think he's meeting with President Trump, according to the reports. That's another conflict that I don't see resolving before January 20th. So you've got big problems around the world that you're going to have to deal with. You can only inherit it what it is. But I think that the Trump team should come in with the framework in mind saying, we may not be able to go right back into maximum economic pressure campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Maybe there's a different version of that, but you have to accept that the world, especially in Europe and the Middle East, has changed and craft your policies towards the world that's handed to you. I would say the most important thing that a second Trump term could do, or a Harris term, quite frankly, is to focus on the threat and the aggressiveness from the Chinese Communist Party, not only towards Taiwan. Taiwan certainly is a major point, but we were seeing for a time almost daily incursions over the Second Thomas Shoal. And when you look at, the militarization of the South China Sea, nothing is more important than deterring Xi Jinping's aggressive military tactics in that theater. And so that means taking things like the Quad that Biden has taken to the leader level. That means continuing that, doubling down on our relationships, on our allies. I just got back from Seoul and Tokyo. I was in Seoul for a trilateral initiative led by Senator Haggerty, but it's bipartisan senators, Republicans and Democrats that were there. And our message, everybody on that trilateral, to the South Koreans and the Japanese was there was continuity on the importance of the relationship between the United States, Japan, South Korea, no matter who wins this presidential. So I would say my guess would be the first sort of policy, when you think about the foreign policy portfolio, after you get done with the cabinet, I would think the first policy announcements and certainly the first big decisions on ambassadorships and assistant secretaries, you'll all see the focus of those announcements from state and DoD and all the relevant agencies to be on in the Asia theater.
One thing I want to say, so thank you both. Both Marie and Morgan have commented on the importance of working together and reaching across the aisle. And I just, as a personal note, that's what we do here at GU Politics, is we really make an effort to look at both sides, really all sides of questions, and have an informed discussion about that. And this is exactly the sort of thing that I really think personifies that. I've always said personally, I've been honored that I have been able to teach Mike Gallagher and John Ossoff and people on both sides of the aisle. And so I expect some people in here will become members of Congress, members of the Senate from both sides of the aisle. And so this is the kind of conversation we really want to encourage and support.
Yeah.
Ever growing.
We do our best. We do our best. I do want to open it up to questions from the audience now. And what I want to say is please formulate your question in the form of a
I have
question.
a question.
And we will start. We have mics that are going to be passed around. So I'm going to go to this person here in the gray, the Georgetown gray, for the first question. So if someone can bring her the mic, and if you could please identify yourself, tell us your name, what school you're from, what you're studying, last four digits. No, don't need those.
Hi, my name is Karina. I'm a freshman in the SFS this year, and
It was a joke.
Oh,
That's it.
so you mentioned earlier that Trump has been somewhat cold towards NATO, but that policy has mostly been a response to war fatigue. So how would both of you respond to this fear that the U.S. is spending too much in Ukraine, and at what point do we stop paying their? My second question is, you said America needs to be a leader. How do we make sure that the diplomacy isn't dictating to other countries how to rule and on this topic?
Great. So I'll start with the first question.
I don't think that Trump's hesitance towards NATO is about war fatigue. I wish that if Donald Trump wins, all of his foreign policy sounds like what Morgan said. What worries me is he refused to say in that debate that he wants Ukraine to win. I don't think that he wants Ukraine to win this war. I think he is fine ceding whole swaths of Ukrainian territory to Putin. For whatever reason, and I won't speculate, Donald Trump feels quite a large amount of fondness for Vladimir Putin and other authoritarians. The one foreign leader he mentioned in the debate that likes him is Viktor Orban. Like, that's who we're holding up in our democratic debate. But Putin is the most salient example of that. And I don't think it's about war weariness with Ukraine. I think that my personal opinion, I don't think that he particularly cares for democratic institutions. That's a very strong statement, but I feel confident saying it. I think he is fine with, I think he respects strong men, leaders around the world, and Putin is certainly one of them. So I think he's very willing to cede Ukraine. And I think that NATO, I think he sees it as constraining America, getting us into things, committing us to things, taking our resources. NATO's not perfect, but I don't think it's about war weariness. And if you look at battleground polls, in many of them, including some done recently, by double digits, battleground state voters support continuing to support Ukraine. If you look at sort of the general population, not Republican right-leaning voters. What was your second question? Sorry. Oh, sorry. No, say it again. Sorry. I think I remember, but.
You said America. Wow, that was tough. You said America needs to be a leader. How do we make
Yeah.
sure that our diplomacy isn't dictating to other countries how to rule and infringing on their sovereignty?
Sure, right. I mean, look, that's one of the fundamental questions of foreign policy, right? Is we also see in polling that Americans like when leaders do things that are in our interest. Foreign policy is not charity either. It's not imposition and it's not charity. People like when Kamala Harris talks about doing things in the United States' interest. That doesn't have to just be a purely security interest. But I think the way you do that is by actually having partnerships with them. I was very when Donald Trump would go in places and dictate terms to countries, and he talks about this quite publicly. This isn't just me saying that, right? He thinks that the United States can and should dictate to countries what our relationship will look like, and that doesn't work, and isn't the way to be a superpower that is still respected. So I think investing in international institutions, doing things like paying our fair share, playing our role when it comes to things like climate around the world. Those are the kinds of ways that we build partnerships, and don't just go in someplace and say, well, we're the US, we're going to tell you what to do. Because even if we wanted to, it doesn't really tend to work. The problems we face are really tend to be global ones. So, I mean, just look at Trump's rhetoric. Right? Like, I think it is deeply dangerous for exactly the question you're asking, because I think that he believes we can and should go it alone, and believes we can dictate to other countries with threats of tariffs or force or whatever, what to do.
Thank you. Morgan.
I know you all want to ask questions, so I'll be very quick. I get the intense emotional reaction to Trump. I understand why people have that. That's why I'm so grounded in policy and what actually happened. So there were no new wars under President Trump. Whenever we started the negotiations with the Taliban for the last 18 months, I'd have to look, I think it was 18 months of the administration, none of our troops were killed in Afghanistan. The most embarrassing thing that has happened, I think one of the biggest disgraces in modern history is our chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. The 13 young men and women that perished, they did not need to die that way. They did. They gave their lives for their country, and we are certainly forever grateful to that and their country. But Afghan women right now, I'm literally working today on a 13-year-old girl in Afghanistan, trying to get her to an underground school because the Taliban were trying to forcibly marry her. Because President Biden was so insistent that he was getting out of Afghanistan without the conditions-based approach that we actually negotiated. In our deal, you could not withdraw the troops without meeting certain conditions. Not killing Americans were certainly, one of them. But because there was an insistence that we were getting out of Afghanistan no matter what, even despite the warnings from the generals and the people in the intelligence community who told President Biden it was going to happen, he forced it, it happened, and it could not have been a more chaotic disaster. We saw Americans die. We saw Americans left behind. We saw allies left behind. We still don't have the number of Americans that are left behind. We still don't have the number of allies that are left behind. So I think it's important not just to focus on about who tweeted better and who gave the nicer speech. Let's start going through the realities of what has actually happened. We gave President Biden the Abraham Accords. Within 3 months of President Biden and Harris taking office, Hamas started firing at Israel. Within 7 months, Kabul fell to the Taliban. Within a year, we saw Russia invade Ukraine, which for all the talk about Russia and Ukraine did not happen on our watch. If Trump is such a Putin lover, why didn't he invade on our watch? Why did he wait till the Democrats were in office? I would argue because it's the same people that he knew from the second Obama term when he invaded Ukraine the first time. So he invaded under Bush too. He invaded under Obama second term, and then he invaded again in Biden. Why didn't he invade under Trump? No one, I mean, you'll have to ask him, but I would argue, that he sees and smells weakness and saw the opportunity. It's not, by the way, just about smelling weakness. You could go on my think tank's website. I can go through the list of things that I think were policy deterrence failures that gave Putin the green light from the Biden-Harris administration that it was okay for him to invade. So then we see basically chaos or a new war in every year of the Biden administration, culminated last year, obviously with the October 7th attacks, which again killed 40 Americans, in which we still have 4 Americans that are held hostage today by a terrorist group. They are held behind enemy lines. The only reason we're down to 4 is because they just shot one of our fellow citizens in the back of the head. So the reality is the world's in a really bad place. There is chaos and war in almost every theater. Dictators like Maduro, we haven't even gotten to the Western Hemisphere. Dictators around the world are stronger, they're more emboldened. You see Russia now making a military alliance with DPRK. You see China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea that resupply each other. So it was resupply each other, what I call a supply chain of terror from a military hardware perspective. They're resupplying each other with munitions. They're resupplying each other with drones. The failure of Iran policy has a direct effect in Russia and Ukraine when since the fall of 2022, Russia has been using Iranian drones to kill Ukrainians in their cities. So I'm like, fine, we can talk about rhetoric, but there is a new war and a new catastrophe and more Americans killed under the Biden administration than anything we ever saw in the Trump administration.
Thank you.
Oh, so many questions.
The gentleman here in the blue jacket.
Thank you both so much for being here. My name is Ian. I'm a senior in the School of Foreign Service studying international politics. And I just want to get your opinion on what you think of strategic ambiguity. And that's been described as a differentiating factor between the Trump administration, the Biden-Harris administration. And I grew up in Europe, so there's been a lot of differences of the opinions of what they think of both of the.
Are you talking about Taiwan?
No, but
Strategic ambiguity?
it could also be broadly speaking, like a
Oh.
lot, like some people credit strategic ambiguity to President Trump bringing like Kim Jong-un to the table
Oh, I
and
see.
Vladimir Putin's not acting or invading another country, seeing as they don't know how Trump would respond, and kind of versus being clear and like, these are our red lines and this is where we want our policy to look like.
Okay, so let's start with Morgan strategic. We talk about that in class too. so
Yeah.
That's good.
So I think it needs to be revisited it's been the US policy for 40 years on Taiwan, at least, maybe more. It needs to be revisited as a policy, I think. So I think, I don't know, I assume the reason why President Biden said, no, we're actually going to fight, we will fight and defend Ukraine, which was not US policy. And then his staff went and walked it back. I assume that was actually a tactical move from the administration. Like, we want him to put it out there and then we're going to go back behind the scenes and say, no, we still stand by this policy. But we do that a lot in government sometimes, right? That's not, so that was how I read it, that was actually like purposeful, that they were giving two different messages. It's probably time to be clear with China on where our red lines are, where we stand. I mean, I think that policy towards Taiwan has served us for a very long time. A couple years ago, when I was on duty in Hawaii, I went back and was like reading some of the Nixon, Kennedy debates where they were having, pretty detailed debate, on Taiwan then. So I think it makes sense. As it relates to DPRK, I was just talking to the South Koreans about this, and I think it's a really, really, tough issue. In the Trump administration, we looked at it as, listen, we've tried everything else. Republicans and Democrats, both sides of the aisle when they're office have tried to get North Korea to commit to denuclearization. It hasn't worked, right? So it wasn't finger pointing. We were just looking at it like, well, how can we do something different that no one has tried yet? Which is why President Trump wanted to try the leader-to-leader talks. He did get Kim Jong-un to commit to denuclearization, which is the first time a North Korean leader had publicly committed to it. He obviously did not do it. But again, we were sort of looking at it as, how do we do something extreme? How do we think about this policy really differently? How do we get leverage back? We did get those sanctions at the UN under Nikki Haley, which were the toughest sanctions that had ever been put on North Korea at the time. So I think, the DPRK is hard. There's no envoy in the Biden administration for North Korea. I don't know if this is true, but public reporting says that they haven't had a single meeting with the North Koreans in 4 years. They have the capability with their ballistic missiles to hit anywhere in the continental United States. We obviously have missile defense, but the fact that they have those kind of capabilities means, I think, that whether it is Trump or Harris, I would urge both teams, you have to take this issue off the back burner and you have to bring it back to the front burner. And you've got to get leverage somehow back with the North Koreans. And we don't have it. And that's not a partisan comment about Biden. It's like an intractable problem that Republicans and Democrats have been unable to solve, unfortunately.
Thank you.
I'll be very, very brief.
Please.
Tony. I think part of your question is when some people say, Trump is so crazy, maybe it's strategic. I think I don't want to say a bad word on stage. I think that's like putting like a bow tie on the madman theory. And I don't want my president to be a madman with nuclear weapons. And I actually think it's useful when other countries have a general sense for how we will react, because it prevents miscalculation and unnecessary escalation. I don't think it's good. And by the way, the madman theory, when we used to talk about Richard Nixon, like behind the scenes, Nixon was very clear. He knew what he wanted to do. His staff knew what he wanted to do. I don't think anybody knows what Donald Trump would do in the genuine crisis. So I don't think it's strategic. I think it's crazy. And I think that just to very, very briefly touch on what Morgan said in her last answer, I also think countries around the world, yes, we are still the world's one superpower. I think countries around the world, non-state actors like terrorist organizations make a whole bunch of calculations every day about what to do, some of which have something to do with the US and some of which don't.
Superpower still? That's how you would.
Well, I think that we are a declining superpower, and I think that we're pretty close to a multipolar world. And I think if you look at different measures, whether it's economic or military, like China's pretty close in many of them.
I
Like
think
as
China
one of
for sure.
the right. I think that, for example, we won't go into this in detail, but why did Hamas decide to attack on October 7th? I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. I think none of them have to do with Washington, D.C. We probably disagree deeply on this, but we can go into that later.
But we both love Israel, so.
But by the way, this is a fascinating exam question
Yeah.
about
Write that
the
down,
nature
everyone.
of the global system. Is it a bipolar world? Is it a multipolar world? What direction is it moving in?
And there's
Yeah.
lots of good academic writing on this right now.
A lot of good stuff.
Right.
I'll make one comment about North Korea. Whoever gets elected, whether it's Trump or Harris, one person they should talk to is our own Victor Cha
Of
here.
course, I mean, that's like an always statement, right?
And I
Always.
knew there would be agreement on that. I
Yeah.
knew there would be agreement
Always, right?
on
Everybody loves
that.
Victor Cha.
He would serve either administration
That's-
brilliantly.
That is very true.
But that's a point of personal knowledge. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Prakriti, and I'm a first year in the SFS. As a new voter, the way the Biden-Harris administration handled this issue of Gaza and the genocide of Palestine will definitely play a part in how I and if I will vote in this election. In your expert opinions, how do you think this year's election will change regarding the course of the genocide in Gaza, regardless of whether it's Vice President Harris or President Trump?
You want me to start with that, Tony? Thanks. Thank you, my friend.
I could give a discussion on what is genocide, but I'm not
I
going to go
know.
there.
I think it's an electoral issue. I think it is an issue that for many of us is very personal and emotional and moral. I know we're here to talk about elections, but I think there are a lot of issues in this election that people feel very personally and deeply about that aren't about GDP numbers or whatever, and I think this is one of them. I think that if Kamala Harris wins, I think there is no person that would be running for president today that would fundamentally alter our relationship with Israel, whether or not you think that's a good thing. And I'm going to talk about why I think Harris is better than Trump. It is hard for me to imagine a president who would cut off all support to Israel to get them to stop doing what they're doing, whether we think that's a good policy or not. I'm just giving you my honest opinion. I think that we should sanction Israeli ministers, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, for what they're doing in the West Bank, for example. And the Biden administration has done some sanctions in the West Bank, not on Smotrich and Ben-Gvir yet, but they've actually been focused more on the West Bank. We're all focused on Gaza, and Gaza is horrific in many ways. Where the peace process is dying today is in the West Bank. And it's because of the extremist right-wing Netanyahu government's attempts to destroy the ability to have a Palestinian state there. I was there the morning that the IDF had destroyed a Palestinian peace activist, bulldozed their house. I saw a Palestinian school that had been burned to the ground by Israeli settlers after October 7th. And again, I'm a strong supporter of Israel, but this is where it's dying. So I think that I think that Donald Trump, for all of his personal feelings about Prime Minister Netanyahu, cares not at all about the Palestinians. I think the Abraham Accords were very good in many ways. Peace and talking is better than shooting and not. But the fact that they left out the Palestinians and it took away, the one quibble I would have with it is I think I've heard from a lot of Palestinian activists that it took away a key piece of leverage when Arab states were making peace with Israel, leaving them behind. So I think that Donald Trump does not care at all about the Palestinians. I think he will let Bibi do whatever he wants in prosecuting the war in Lebanon, and I think there's going to be a ground invasion, in prosecuting the war in Gaza, and we'll let him do whatever he wants with settlements in the West Bank in contravention of international and in many cases Israeli law. So I understand the deep frustration with the Biden-Harris administration. I get it. I talk to voters and young people and say, like, there are two choices here. And I believe the Trump administration does not care at all about what is happening with guns. And I think the Harris administration will be deliberate in how, I mean, when Bibi was here a couple months ago, she was very tough with him publicly, much tougher than Biden had been. And it may not be as tough as you want or tough as other people want, but these things come slowly. Progress comes slowly. And she was much tougher publicly than Biden had been with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I think has a deep personal moral feeling that there are the same number of Palestinians and Jewish Israelis living in the same amount of space, and neither of them are going anywhere. And it is a failing of the United States if we do not try and get the Palestinians some ability, dignity, self-determination that they deserve. And so I don't know what that looks like. I don't. But I know that she feels deeply about it.
All right, Morgan.
Well, I think you're probably not considering voting for Trump, but that's okay. But I would say I'm glad it's your first election that you get to vote. I would encourage you to vote. No, even if you don't vote for two-party candidates, I mean, for the two main parties, if you vote for someone else or, you know, you go down and vote for Senate, House, it's important to vote. My first election was the year 2000. I know you guys were born. Was anybody born?
That was mine too. That was my first election.
It was,
too.
no, look, you said no. Okay, I knew you were born, but
And that was a rough election.
But I was a voter in Florida the year 2000. And although you weren't born yet, that was a vote where I learned very quickly that every vote does actually count. So I would say do whatever. I mean, it's between you and the voting booth, right? So do whatever you need to do. There's still a lot of races down ballot, even if you feel conflicted. So I would encourage you to vote no matter what. I think it's important. Unless you're in a swing state and you're voting for Kamala, then don't vote. Just kidding. No, just kidding. It's important. I want to listen. I can go in and defend the Abraham Accord. Let me just give you a very quick 2-minute thing on the Abraham Accords and why the Palestinians were quote unquote left out. So Jared Kushner worked on a peace plan and worked on an economic vision for what can happen for the Palestinians. And he believed and cared, and I know him very well, we're very good friends. He cared very deeply about actually getting to a two-state solution. For many reasons, probably a lot of our policy decisions, the Palestinians did not want to talk to us about it. We did, some of you who have studied this stuff for a while remember that we did an economic conference in Bahrain where we tried to get a lot of business leaders there. The Palestinians, mostly, some of them showed up, but for the most part, none of the leadership showed up, and they did not want to hear our peace plan. We did get Netanyahu in that peace plan to agree to a two-state solution. And it was the first time that he had agreed to a Palestinian state. So I will say before we did Abraham Accords, we did try a peace plan first. And like many administrations before us, we failed in achieving that peace plan. So we only pursued Abraham Accords after the Palestinians didn't come to the table. And so the question on the table for us, when we realized that the Gulf states were willing to normalize relations with Israel, the question for us was, do you try and open up a new Middle East? Do you bring these parties together, even if you don't have the Palestinians, in the hopes that you have, more young, Emiratis going to, Israel for spring break and more Israelis going to visit Bahrain and Morocco, and at the time, Sudan. Obviously, Sudan's in a terrible situation now. But we made a bet on peace and opening up, and we thought the more that we could develop economic and trade ties between Israel and the Gulf Arab states and between Morocco and Sudan and others, we thought, we're going to take the peace deal that we can get. It wasn't the one that we originally planned for, but if they're showing and signaling this willingness to open up and to normalize relations, we thought that could only inevitably lead to more peace breaking out in the region. So I'm defensive of Abraham Accords from that aspect, because it's not that we ignored the Palestinians. We tried to get them to the table. We failed for numerous reasons, but I am proud that we did get those peace deals. And I would say that I think you see their strength, that they're still standing amidst what is clearly a very chaotic and terrible time in the Middle East right now. And as it relates to Israel and to everything that's going on there, first of all, there's really I don't know that Trump and Bibi have the best relationship, actually. He says negative things about him. So I don't believe that I don't even know what would happen in Israeli elections. They'll have to call them eventually. I don't think that, that they have the warmest, I don't think they're on the warmest of terms right now, personally, just from what, at least from what I read from the news. I've not talked to Trump about it, but if you just look at his public statements. So I do take issue, though, with saying that the Trump administration just that we didn't care about the Palestinians. My
Donald
brother-in-law,
Trump doesn't.
but I
didn't
think-
say all of you.
I know, but
said
I think
Donald
he does. I actually really do think that he wants to get to a deal on this. My brother-in-law is a Muslim. My niece is a Muslim. I am Jewish. I have Christian Jews, Muslims in my family, and I've spent my life in the Middle East. And while I'm an ardent supporter of Israel, little children dying on either side is terrible. It's awful. I agree with what Marie said about one of the reasons that we don't have peace is because of the West Bank. I think it's for a different reason. I think the Palestinian people have been completely failed by the choice of Hamas and Abbas. Why is Abbas and his children billionaires? Why their people starve? Go talk to the Palestinian people, which I'm sure you did when you were there, but they haven't had democratic elections since
Yeah.
2004,
you're right.
2006.
Yeah, you were
So
right about
they have
that.
they have a choice between Hamas and Abbas. It's no real democracy. He is a thug. He tried to kill a friend of mine and his family, who's an outspoken Palestinian activist and also an American citizen.
Yeah.
And he steals from his people. He's a freaking billionaire. I'm so sick of this hypocritical Abbas regime, these hypocritical Palestinians who have robbed and stolen from their people and made mothers in Palestine think that the best hope for their children is to be a martyr. That's disgusting when your own children are sitting in their big houses in Dubai and Doha. Give me a break. So you know what? The Palestinian people deserve better than the leadership that they have gotten from Abbas and from the Palestinian Authority. And if we're going to have a real day after plan, let me tell you what, it doesn't need to be the United States and Europe solving this. Enough with America and Europe we should be a part of it. We should facilitate it. But the groups in the countries in the region, the Gulf Arab states, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, all of these countries need to tell us what a day after plan looks like. I think America and Europe, I think we've done enough screwing up the Middle East.
Believe it or not, we are out of time. Now, I want to do one final thing, and that is I
Sorry.
want to give each person about a minute
Okay.
to offer some words of hope to the group here. And I feel I must say the first election I voted in,
Yeah.
1976.
Hello.
I was the only person to ever be 1 year old when voting in an election, but if anybody's doing any math. So, Marie?
Why are you starting with me on hope, Tony? I think first I will say domestically, we have right now record number of young people registering to vote for the first time. And that gives me hope because what I don't want is what the autocrats want, which is convincing us that democracy doesn't work, right? One of Putin's goals is to say to people, look, your system's really messy. Stability is so much better, right? Even if you can't vote, even if you can't speak your mind, even if you don't have a free press. So I am hopeful that so many young people are voting, regardless of politics. I am hopeful because Kamala Harris is a new generation of politician. Not only did we know from polls, but we just know in our hearts that having these two 80-year-old men running for president was probably not the best we could do. And I am so grateful that we have not just Kamala Harris, but when I look at my party, and I will speak for my party, the Republican Party also has some real talented policymakers that are younger. I don't agree with them, but we look at someone like Governor Josh Shapiro. We look at Gretchen Whitmer. We look at Pete Buttigieg. We look at Wes Moore. The Democratic Abigail Spanberger, who's going to be the next governor of Virginia. We have the next generation who don't bring a lot of that baggage with them, who are John Ossoff, who are stepping into these roles, taking on public service in a way that I find to be quite hopeful. So that's what keeps me going.
That's hope. Hope.
I will give it. I will also say, I apologize in advance that I'm going to run out the door and not talk to any of you only because I have to host this is like my 5th event of the day. So I'm running out to host one more event. You can find me on X at Morgan Ortegas. My DMs are open and they have my email too. So and I mean this seriously, please contact me if there's anything I can help you with in diplomacy, intel, military. So I apologize. I'm not avoiding you by running out. So I wanted to let you know that. Hope, I mean, all of you are the hope, right? And like I said, it literally feels like yesterday I was sitting in your shoes listening to Republicans and Democrats, debate what we should do after 9/11 and the Iraq War. I remember that it's interesting. I think it was Senator Graham said this to me. It was this, the story is like basically you come to Washington, you all are here, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, you know, not only in the country, in the world. So, you know, you come here and you always think there's a they, right? They are going to do this, they are going to do that. And then one day you're in the Situation Room, you know, you're with the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State, as we both had this experience, looks at you and says, well, what do I say? And you're thinking, oh my God, I'm like advising, I can't remember if I went grocery shopping this weekend, and yeah, or if I even remember to do my laundry, and the Secretary of State wants to know what I think. All of you will be there before you know it if you work really hard, I promise, and keep to your ideals, keep your friendships. Don't let all of the disinformation coming at us from both sides, right? Iran trying to do Kamala stuff, Russia trying to do Putin trying to do Trump stuff. Don't fall for all of that. Don't let politics ruin your family relationships, your personal relationships. Have passionate arguments, but respect each other. Know that at the end of the day, that the person that you may disagree with politically would probably put their life on the line for the country as well. So have those disagreements and just work hard. I don't know if that's like a thing amongst your generation from what I hear, but I will tell you is that there will always be, it was a joke. Come on, guys. There will always be somebody in the room that has something better than you. Somebody will always have gone to a better school. Somebody's parent is richer. Somebody's better looking. Somebody drives a better car. Somebody will always have something up on you. But what you can control is, do I work the hardest? Am I a team player? Do I have a good attitude? Am I bringing everything to the table? If you decide to outwork everybody, you can get almost anywhere in Washington.
The future's there for anyone to change. How will you change the future? Let's thank our panelists very much.
We are actually friends, legitimately. Oh.
Let me give you this. Okay, there we go. Thank you.